The Emigrée by Carol Rumens was written in 1993 and was published in the collection Thinking of Skins. In the poem, an unspecified female speaker describes leaving the country of her birth at a very young age never to return. Her idealised memory of the city where she once lived endures, even in the face of news that suggests its character has been irreparably damaged by war and an authoritarian regime. The speaker has no way back there, but she keeps the memory of her country alive through her mother tongue. Her city becomes a character in her own imagination, and although there are suggestions near the end that this is a cause of internal conflict for her, communicated through images of both light and dark, the poem ends with the acceptance that the existence of any shadow is just proof that there is light in the first place. The poem has an unspecified female speaker. If it is to be taken on a literal level about a person who has left their homeland, then the speaker and the poet should not be taken as one and the same. Carol Rumens is a British poet, born and brought up in South London. So the speaker may, therefore, be fictional, or perhaps be inspired by a person Rumens has met in real life. In an interview with Lydia Vianu in 2001, Rumens revealed her belief in the importance of elsewhere. She has a particular interest in the literary cultures of Central and Eastern Europe, and in collaboration with her partner, who is Russian, has translated a number of poems from the original Russian into English. She has spent time in countries with repressive regimes in the communist bloc, not only in Russia, but also in the former Czechoslovakia, the now separate and democratic countries of the Czech Republic and Slovakia, where she helped to edit a journal about human rights abuses. Of her trips to Prague, she has said, "This was much more frightening than going to Russia, because I was smuggling in letters, books, money, etc. The people I was visiting could have been in serious trouble had I been caught and questioned." In the same interview, however, she also revealed that, in the lines about having no passport, I'm using a metaphor for loving a forbidden person. This invites us to interpret the poem on a metaphorical level as well as a literal one, perhaps to be about someone who has left either the past behind, such as their childhood, or a person with whom a love affair is impossible, which opens up the possibility that the poet has adopted a persona through which to explore aspects of her own experience. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't actually matter which of these Rumens had in mind when she composed this poem, and there is no one correct interpretation. Because the poem does not identify the country the speaker has left by name, it successfully manages to speak at a universal level to anyone who has been physically, emotionally, or temporally displaced from a country, a person, or a period in their lives to which they cannot return, and the feeling of homesickness they endure as a consequence. The poem comprises 3 stanzas. The first 2 have 8 lines, while the third has 9. The poem is written in free verse. It has no rhyme scheme or fixed rhythmic pattern. Lines have varying numbers of stresses, which is perhaps an indication of the speaker's subconscious sense of unease. There are a number of instances of anaphora, such as "it may be," "my city," and "they accuse me," which lends these lines a rhythmic quality. Rumens employs a first-person narrator, I, and, apart from the first sentence, the present tense, which helps to communicate the idea that the poem is more about the memory of the place, which is in the here and now, rather than the place itself at a past moment in time. The poem is written in an everyday conversational speech style, which Rumens has explained by saying, "I do try to keep close to my spoken diction. I have to be able to say the poems aloud and feel them naturally in my mouth. Having said this, Rumens' meaning is often opaque, as she does combine words to create a figurative language which can be ambiguous. There are references to light and dark throughout, such as sunlight clear, bright, an impression of sunlight, white streets, glow, tastes of sunlight, white plain, shining, dark, and my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. All three of the end-stopped stanzas actually end with the word sunlight, which has the effect of leaving it as a lasting impression, not only in the mind of the speaker, but also in the mind of the reader. There are also a number of words that form a semantic field of conflict, such as war, tyrants, rolls its tanks, and frontiers. Emigrée comes from the French and simply means emigrant, or someone who leaves one country to settle in another, especially because of political conditions. The feminine double E ending indicates that the speaker is female. She is also, of course, an immigrant, but the title and therefore the poem looks at her relationship with the country she has left, rather than the country to which she has come. The poem begins, "There once was a country." The use of the word once, which we associate with once upon a time, the past tense was, and the indefinite article a, gives this introduction the feel of a fairy tale, conjuring an unnamed fantasy land from a long time ago that no longer exists. The use of the past tense is interesting. If this were a real country, surely it would still be there now. Does she mean that the political upheaval has changed it to such an extent that it is unrecognisable, and that the country she knew effectively no longer exists? Or is this country an extended metaphor for a period of time in the past, such as her childhood, or a person she can no longer be with, but with whom she felt like she was at home? The use of the ellipsis perhaps suggests an invitation to the reader to travel back there with her in her imagination. What we should perhaps keep in mind, though, as we read the rest of the poem, is how much of it is also a fairy tale. Whatever this place represents, even though she left it as a child, her memory of it is sunlight clear. This is the first time that memory is linked with sunlight, and the way in which the two are made synonymous becomes a motif throughout the poem. For the speaker, sunlight seems to symbolise the optimism, happiness and clarity of the past, which is a source of comfort to her, while overlooking its negative aspects. The reason she gives for her country being frozen in a perpetual summer is that it seems I never saw it in that November, which I am told comes to the mildest city. The month of November, at least in the northern hemisphere, is associated with the onset of winter and the loss of light caused by shortening days. It could also be meant metaphorically to signify a time of incipient danger in the days leading up to the war, which appears to have been instrumental in installing tyrants in the seat of power. The superlative mildest would seem to refer to climate, but can also describe a person's temperament, which perhaps ties into the way in which it is personified later in the stanza. She admits that her memory of it is immune to information that contradicts her rose-tinted perception. The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view, and introduces the idea of the unreliability of memory. The use of the metaphor, the bright filled paperweight, is an interesting one. Paperweight is a small, solid, ornamental object used to stop papers from being disturbed by drafts of air. The type of paperweight to which she is alluding made from sculpted coloured glass rods encased in more glass, which is colourless and transparent, communicates not only the beauty of this memory, but also its rigidity and immovability. It is also perhaps something which helps to keep her grounded. The dominance of stressed syllables in this image, the bright, filled paperweight, also gives the line a certain solidity and heaviness. In the next line, we find out what the worst news is that won't make her change her mind. It may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, she says, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. The word may is a modal verb, used in conjunction with the base form of a verb, and is usually used to communicate a possibility of something in the future. Here, though, followed as it is by the word but, it is being used to communicate a current state of affairs which the speaker is rejecting outright on the basis of its irrelevancy to her personally. The anaphora here, with the repeated it may be, serves to underline her obstinacy. The way in which she describes the city as being sick with tyrants personifies it and suggests that it is a victim of a disease. The metaphor, branded by an impression of sunlight, not only evokes its light, but also its heat, and implies that this memory is as permanent as if the sunlight has physically left a mark on her. An impression is an idea, a feeling, or an opinion about something or someone which is formed without conscious thought or on the basis of little evidence. And once again we have to question the accuracy of the portrait of the country that is being painted here. The second stanza begins, "The white streets of that city, the graceful slopes glow even clearer as time rolls its tanks and the frontiers rise between us." She describes the city as beautiful. The whiteness of the streets suggests purity and the alliteration of graceful and glow. The consonants of the liquid L sounds and the assonants of the long O sounds are euphonious or pleasing to the ear. Time, which is personified, seems to be an enemy incursion, come to occupy the city and effectively take it away from her as it rolls its tanks and causes frontiers or borders to rise between us. This image suggests that time is a threatening and inexorable onward force, enhanced by the plosive alliteration of time and tanks, which puts up barriers that are close like waves between them. We usually associate the passage of time with a fading of memory, but paradoxically it seems that what has forced her away only makes her memory glow even clearer, suggesting that the longer she is away from it, the more idealized it becomes. She turns her attention to the language of her home that she presumably stopped speaking when she left. That child's vocabulary I carried here like a hollow doll opens and spills a grammar. The simile, like a hollow doll, evokes the image of matryoshka, or brightly coloured Russian nesting dolls, which symbolise fertility. Instead of ever smaller dolls inside it, though, it spills a grammar, suggesting that her basic grasp of vocabulary or words is a seed which will grow into a more complex command of the grammar or rules of her language. As soon I shall have every coloured molecule of it. The use of the adjective coloured not only links back to the matryoshka dolls, but also suggests vibrancy and life, and the word molecule implies her desire to understand every last little bit of it. The line, "It may now be a lie banned by the state," alludes to dictatorships which abuse human rights by trying to suppress indigenous languages, such as happened in Ukraine in 1876, when Tsar Alexander II of Russia decreed that the Ukrainian language was to be banned in print. Her memory is too strong, however, as she can't get it off her tongue. It tastes of sunlight. When she says, "I can't get it off my tongue," it means that she cannot stop speaking it, as it is an integral part of the idealised memories of her homeland. This image employs synesthesia, which is where two or more of the senses are mixed as the poet plays with and combines both the metaphorical and literal meanings of the word tongue. The way in which this language tastes of sunlight is an indication of the all-encompassing nature of her memories, which take over all her senses. The third stanza begins, "I have no passport, there's no way back at all." A passport not only allows the legal crossing of a border into another country, but is a formal document establishing a person's identity. Rumens has suggested in an interview that the lack of a passport is a metaphor for loving a forbidden person, and her language does now take on the sense of two people meeting illicitly as her city becomes personified once more. My city comes to me in its own white plane. She may not have a passport, but this will not take her identity away from her. The adjective white here perhaps alludes not only to the white streets of the second stanza, but also to the whiteness of paper, which can also be said to be a plane or a flat surface. It could be argued that her city is able to come to her as she is able to reconstruct it in words on paper. Indeed, in the next line she claims that it lies down in front of me, docile as paper. This simile is strange. Paper, in common with all inanimate objects, could be described as docile or submissive. So why choose this if not to suggest that the city is a creation which is under her editorial control? The reader again perhaps wonders how much she has told us about this land is true, and how much is imagined. In the next line, she suggests that she lavishes attention on it as though it is some kind of pet, the appearance of which she prettifies. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. In the next line, she talks of the city in the terms of a lover, as it takes her dancing through the city of walls. Note the anaphora of my city, the repetition of this phrase asserting her ownership of at least her version of it. The language becomes more negative and threatening now, though, as they, presumably the walls, accuse me of absence. They circle me. They accuse me of being dark in their free city. Here, for the first time, the speaker refers to her city in terms of darkness rather than light, and there is a sense that she may be suffering some kind of internal conflict. It may not be as perfect as she remembers, or she perhaps feels guilt for having left it, as she appears to be the source of this darkness. She remains protective of it, though, as it hides behind me, while they mutter death. The final line provides some kind of resolution for this internal conflict, though, as she reasons that her shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. There can be no shadow without the sun, so her shadow is, in fact, no bad thing, as it is proof of the existence of the light. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.